Now, for the latest on what's happening in South Africa, we're joined now by Raymond Gilpin. He's Chief Economist of the Regional Bureau for Africa at the United Nations Development Programme. Welcome, as always.
Thank you.
So help get us up to speed on the latest on these new COVID cases in South Africa and the surrounding countries.
Thank you so much. The new cases in South Africa have been rising at an alarming rate. Quite recently, week-on-week increases topped 300%. The country alone accounts for over 60% of global cases of the new Omicron virus. And it seems that on the slightly positive side, even though it's more transmissible, the effects and the impacts are less severe. But the sheer volumes are what are going to overwhelm the healthcare systems for South Africa. And within South Africa itself, it seems to be concentrated over 60%, close to 60%, in a single province, Gauteng province.
So then what's the vaccination rate like in the region, and what are the biggest roadblocks to getting more people vaccinated?
The vaccination rates are ticking up. They have been in neighboring Botswana, which is the other Southern African country that has identified the Omicron virus. We've seen almost 60% of the population being vaccinated. But even with that high vaccination rate, we've had a few cases in Botswana. In South Africa, though, the vaccination rates seem to have lagged a little bit. There is a little bit of vaccine hesitancy, but the biggest issue is the supply of vaccines, of adequate vaccines to ensure that all eligible South Africans are vaccinated and that we get the country as close to herd immunity as possible, as quickly as possible. At current rates, it will take about over 5 months for the entire cohort to be vaccinated in the Republic of South Africa.
And as you mentioned, supply there, but also some aspects of vaccine hesitancy. And we know that South Africa has floated the idea of a mandate. What's the likelihood that they and some of these neighboring governments will implement some kind of mandate?
Well, it depends on, to a large extent, it's a political issue. Also, it's a socio-economic issue. Locking down Southern Africa again would have very dire socioeconomic consequences, particularly around this time, since this is the time that most businesses had hoped to make a little bit of profit after having been in the doldrums for about a year and a half. And so a lockdown would not just be devastating from a social perspective, but also from a business perspective.
And we did see that the African Union has called on member states to urgently rescind these travel bans, but break down the controversy over these travel bans in the first place.
Well, I think there's three important issues with the travel ban. First, quite a number of African countries were particularly concerned that unlike the Delta variant that took 2 weeks for countries to be labeled countries of concern, with the Omicron virus, it was the announcement came in 72 hours. Secondly, most African countries believe that the virus did not emanate from the African continent. They believe that there is some evidence suggesting that it had been present elsewhere, and it was only discovered by South Africa. So they believe South Africa and the African continent are both being punished for having identified the virus. And thirdly, there's also, as I mentioned earlier, the hesitancy because of the dire socioeconomic consequences. We see that this new virus seems to be affecting younger people a lot more, and that's the core of the labor force in South Africa. And so it will be a standstill from an international trade perspective, but also a standstill from a domestic labor market perspective.
Well, thank you. Always great to have you on. Raymond Gilpin there, Chief Economist of the Regional Bureau for Africa at the United Nations Development Programme.